Sure, I understand that, but at the moment, you guys are still in charge, and I'm asking this administration, because I've asked this question many, many times. It's been over a year. You have said to us these assessments about Israel's potential IHL violations has been going on. The fact that you have this channel, does that mean your work on that front is going to speed up or not?
So our work is already moving as quickly as we can possibly make it move, but they are difficult assessments that we have to make that require both gathering facts and making, in some cases, complicated judgments. And so I have never been able to put a timetable on that work because we have a number of different incidents that we are looking at. But we are committed to working through that process and having an answer as quickly as possible.
Can I follow up? Has there been any conclusion to the 500 CHURG incidences that you were looking at?
So let me just first say that we have never confirmed an exact number. I know that number has been reported. But when it comes to incidents that we have looked at, there have been some incidents, I think I've spoken to this before, there have been some incidents that go through the process that you can pretty quickly take out of the process early on, right? It's a typical fact-finding case when you get presented a potentially concerning incident and you find out that no, there's actually a justification for that incident, or there wasn't the harm that was reported, and you can take those out of the process. Then there are the more difficult ones, and those take time, and those are ongoing. I don't have a conclusion to report out yet.
And none of those have been concluded, though?
So what my point is, there are some that, no, they have not. There are some that have been concluded that were in the earlier stage, but no with respect to that.
And to this new channel that is meeting in December, can you give us a sense of what particular incidents would rise to that channel versus the existing channels? How much overlap are we going to see here?
I don't want to speak to it publicly, but there are a number of incidents. You've heard me speak to a number of incidents from this podium. You've heard the Secretary speak to them. We have raised some of them in the National Security Memo 20 report that we issued back in April. There are a number of incidents that we have had questions about and we have had concerns about without speaking to any one of those. We certainly have a list of incidents to go through in that channel, which is not to say that we haven't sought answers through existing channels. We have, but we set up this new channel because we wanted to formalize a mechanism for getting answers to some of these questions.
And then on Gaza, there's reports of just this prevalence of looting of humanitarian aid by gangs in Gaza. There's a report from the Post today that Israeli forces are looking the other way on this or actively facilitating it. What is the U.S. assessment of whether Israel is doing enough to stop this looting in Gaza?
So let me just first say, with respect to the looting that's ongoing, first of all, it's abhorrent, and the people who are looting humanitarian assistance for their own ends are taking food and medicine out of the hands of civilians, including children who need it, incredibly desperate people who need access to this food, and anyone who is stealing or diverting humanitarian assistance for their own profit, for their own gain, is quite obviously harming their own people, and they should stop immediately. That's the first thing that I think needs to be made clear when it comes to looting. Second, when it comes to looting, so what we have seen is a breakdown in the security situation inside of Gaza, and there are a lot of reasons for the breakdown in that security situation. And what we are trying to work through is with the IDF, with COGAT, with the relevant UN agencies to find solutions to get more security assistance delivered to the people that need it. So one of the things you heard us speak to last week is, at our request, the IDF opened new routes to deliver humanitarian assistance. And we're hopeful that some of those new routes will help divert convoys away from looters. But this has been a problem that's been ongoing for some time. You know, it was a problem several months ago, and we were able to work through a security situation, working through our UN partners. A lot of that work we can't really speak to, given its sensitive security question. But it is a critical goal to make sure humanitarian assistance gets to where it needs to go. Now, that said, ultimately, you are not going to finally solve this problem without an end to the war and the establishment of a new governance and security authority inside Gaza. Because ultimately that is the problem right now, is that there is an absence of a governing authority. And it's why we continue to work to establish a new governing authority to make sure that there is someone who, if armed criminal gangs come to loot convoys, that there is someone that can stand up and stop them. and that is an urgent priority for the United States.
At this point, though, is the IDF and COGAT doing enough?
So they're working to establish a security, an improved security situation on the ground. But clearly, when you have looting going on, there's a breakdown, and the IDF certainly bears part of the blame for that. The overall breakdown in authority, the end of an actual government, a government we oppose, to be clear, but a government that was providing day-to-day security, and critically, the lack of a replacement with anything else is ultimately the key culprit for the lack of security on the ground right now, which is why I get back to this point that we have to find an end to the war and the replacement. I don't think anyone believes, or at least no one in our government believes, and most people in the region don't believe, that the IDF ought to be the occupying power inside Gaza providing security for the delivery of humanitarian assistance. There needs to be Palestinian-led security that is preventing convoys from being looted and preserving law and order, and that's what we're trying to work towards. Yeah.
Off the back of Jenny's questioning on the routes, and you saying that the US had asked Israel to open up new routes. What happened over the weekend? This was something that happened near the Kerem Shalom crossing, and in the Washington Post piece that Jenny mentioned, they had said that humanitarian groups had asked Israeli authorities to open up routes that would be safer, that would avoid the criminal gangs. So these routes that they'd asked for, are those the same routes that the US was asking Israel to open up? Are they different routes?
So I don't know which route specifically that they are referring to in the story, that the humanitarian groups were referring to in the story, but what we have communicated to the government of Israel, and lots of times we make these requests to the government of Israel on behalf of humanitarian organizations that we work with. Remember that USAID is the largest provider of humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people. It gets delivered through the UN agencies, who in many events are having their convoys being attacked. So we make these requests for them to open new routes. Whether they are the same specific routes in this instance that the UN agencies are asking for, I can't speak to with that level of detail, but in general, we are in contact with them and in communication with them about how to get new routes open that would alleviate some of the security situation.
And I know that you said that obviously there is no preference for the US to be an for the IDF to be an occupying force within Gaza. Is there any position the US takes in terms of like the IDF providing immediate security to trucks a little bit further down the road once they've entered crossings like Kerem Shalom, because this incident happened near the crossing, and there are reports of the IDF standing by whilst there were Palestinian, as you described them, gang members with guns, and the IDF are just not doing anything.
So this is a question that we have been in intense communication with the government of Israel about, and I don't want to speak to it publicly here. I would note that there have been times when UN agencies have not wanted security to be provided in certain contexts by a belligerent in the conflict, including this conflict, but this underlying question is something that we are actively working on trying to answer.
Okay, and on the Hamas leadership, you had mentioned yesterday about how you had mentioned what sounded like extradition of Hamas leaders, that it would be a US preference. Is the US actively pursuing extradition of these Hamas leaders that have reportedly left Doha and are now in Turkey?
So I was speaking as a policy matter. Anytime that there is a fugitive from U.S. justice, we want to see them return to the U.S. to face justice. But when it comes to specific extradition requests, as you know, it's our longstanding policy not to comment on those. They're a legal matter for the Department of Justice.
Okay, and then just the last one, these sanctions that were announced on the Hamas leaders today, is that related to some of these Hamas leaders that are reportedly now in Turkey? Or just already in the pipeline?
I would have to go back and check. I don't know the specific location. These were sanctions that were already in the pipeline well before the.
Three of them are apparently in Turkey.
So I'd say these are sanctions that were in the pipeline well before the last week. I didn't know that. I don't personally know the exact location of those. But we have sanctioned Hamas leaders that lived in Doha, that lived in Gaza, that lived in relative places around the Middle East.
So just to be clear, you're confirming some of these Hamas leaders are now in Turkey?
I said I don't know the location of.
Okay, so you're not. Confirming their whereabouts.
I think she confirmed
Yes.
the whereabouts of them.
No, I'm asking
I am
you,
not.
like,
No, I very much am not. I can't speak to the location of specific members of Hamas.
Can you, if it is in fact true that you press countries to return or to extradite people indicted in U.S. courts, what about the woman in the Sbarro bombing in Israel years ago, who's been living free in Jordan now? There was long talk of her. Of efforts to get her extradited, and nothing has ever come of them. So why should these Hamas guys worry if
Matt,
just gonna- you-
I'm going to admit you're speaking to a case that predates my tenure, that I have limited at best factual understanding of it, so I shouldn't speak to it. But when it comes to these terrorists who are members and leadership of a group who continue to hold Americans hostage, we do think it's appropriate that they face justice.
Just one more
Yeah.
thing on that, Matt. Secretary has met with the Turkish foreign minister today.
Correct.
Was there a discussion about this particular issue with the Turkish foreign minister?
So he did meet with the Turkish foreign minister, Fidan, in Rio today on the sidelines of the G20. We'll have a readout coming later today. And I don't want to get into too much detail about what, of course, are private diplomatic conversations. But in all of these conversations with countries in the region, he makes clear, number one, that there should be no more business as usual with Hamas. And number two, that any country should use any influence it has with Hamas to secure the release of all the hostages, including the 7 American hostages.
Right, but those can be a little bit contradictory, don't you think? To use the, I mean, is there, I guess what I'm trying to ask is there any chance that Turkey might become the new mediator? Is that something the U.S. would want?
So the first question is one for Turkey to speak to, but when it comes to using influence with Hamas to secure the release of hostages, we would welcome any country playing that kind of positive role. That's what we want to see, but the important thing is that countries step up and use that influence and actually work to try to get these hostages out. And by the way, an important goal of getting the hostages out, not just for their own sake, but for countries who want to see an end to the war. That is one very clear way to end the war.
Yeah, there was an Israeli report, by the way, last week that head of Israel's domestic intelligence agency traveled to Turkey and met with Turkish intelligence head. What do you make of that meeting? Could that be in any way related to like Turkey emerging as a mediator?
I wouldn't want to speculate. That sounds like a question for those two governments to speak to.
Well, you guys
not
are right in
me.
the middle of it, so it is a question for the United States.
I think when it comes to any potential meeting, we would, I would let those two governments speak to it, and certainly what it means in terms of the import of any such meeting. But when it comes to countries that have influence with Hamas, and certainly Turkey is a country that has had influence with Hamas, we want to see all of those countries use that influence to secure the release of all hostages, especially including the 7 Americans who continue to be held hostage. Yeah. Oh, you had your hand up a minute ago. Now you don't. I'm just doing my work down. I get going in order and
I had a
yeah.
Ukraine question, but hopefully we're done.
No, we can go. Yeah, if you want to go to
Okay.
Ukraine, go to.
I wanted to ask about Ukraine firing U.S.-made missiles into Russia. This obviously is a result of the new policy